Stay away from the guests. You embarrass us. The words hit me like ice water, spoken by my own son as casually as asking about the weather. I stood there in my best dress, the navy blue one with tiny flowers that John always said brought out my eyes, clutching a plate of homemade cookies I'd spent the morning baking with my arthritis-swollen hands. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, please just leave a like and subscribe. It'll help me keep finding the courage to speak these truths that so many of us carry in silence. My name is Margaret, and at 76 years old, I thought I knew what rock bottom felt like. I was wrong. The fluorescent light in Andrew's kitchen cast harsh shadows across his face as he stood there, arms crossed, waiting for me to disappear. Behind him, his wife Claire adjusted wine glasses on their granite countertop with the precision of someone staging a magazine photo. Everything in this house gleamed. Stainless steel appliances, marble backsplashes, hardwood floors that reflected the chandelier's crystal teardrops like scattered diamonds. The barn conversion is really quite charming, Claire had said 6 months ago when I first arrived, her voice honey-sweet over the phone. It's got everything you need, Mom. Your own space. Privacy. Independence. What she didn't mention was that it was 100 yards from the main house, hidden behind overgrown hedges where no one could see the peeling paint or hear the radiator's death rattles at 3 a.m. What she called charming, I learned to call exile. I had sold everything to come here. The house in Toledo where John and I raised Andrew, where we celebrated 43 Christmases, where I held my husband's hand as cancer stole him away one shallow breath at a time. I'd packed my entire life into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box of photographs, believing my son when he said, "Come live with us, Mom. We're family." The barn, the guest house, smelled like hay and decades of Ohio winters. The walls were so thin I could hear mice scratching inside them at night, their tiny claws like fingernails on a chalkboard. The single window faced north, ensuring the space never felt warm, even in July. The bed was a twin mattress on a metal frame that groaned every time I shifted positions, and the bathroom was so small I had to open the door to sit on the toilet. But I smiled when Claire showed it to me. I thanked them. I unpacked my few belongings and arranged John's photograph on the windowsill, where the afternoon light might catch his face for just a few precious minutes each day. Because that's what mothers do. We make the best of what we're given. We swallow our disappointment and wear gratitude like armor, protecting our children from the weight of our needs. The Johnsons are coming tonight, Andrew continued, straightening his tie, a silk one I'd given him last Christmas that probably cost more than my monthly pension check. Important clients. This merger could change everything for us. Claire nodded, running her manicured fingers along the edge of their dining table, checking for dust that would never dare settle in her pristine world. We just think it's better if you give us some space tonight. You understand. I understood perfectly. I understood that I was an embarrassment. I understood that my worn cardigan and sensible shoes didn't match their carefully curated aesthetic. I understood that my stories about their father, my husband who built this fortune they now enjoyed, were inconvenient reminders of a simpler time when love mattered more than appearances. Of course, I heard myself say, the words scraping my throat raw. I wouldn't want to intrude. Andrew's shoulders relaxed, and for just a moment, I saw a flicker of the little boy who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms, who'd beg me to read just one more chapter of his favorite book about brave knights and dragons. That boy was gone now, replaced by this stranger in an expensive suit who saw his own mother as a liability. I turned to leave, my cookies still clutched in hands that shook slightly, not from age, but from the effort of holding back everything I wanted to scream. As I reached the door, I heard Claire whisper to Andrew, "Thank God. I was worried she'd make a scene." The gravel path back to the barn crunched under my feet like broken glass. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of their rejection was pulling me toward the earth. The main house glowed behind me, warm yellow light spilling from every window, while ahead of me loomed the dark outline of my exile. Inside my charming accommodation, I set the cookies on the makeshift table, a TV tray I'd found in their garage, and stared at them. Oatmeal raisin, John's favorite, I'd made them from memory, the recipe passed down from my own mother, mixed with the same love that had fed my family for decades. No one would eat them tonight. No one would taste the cinnamon I'd doubled because Andrew liked it that way when he was small. No one would notice that I'd used the last of my good vanilla, the expensive bottle I'd been saving for special occasions. Through my tiny window, I watched the Johnsons arrive in their black Mercedes. Watched Claire embrace Mrs. Johnson like they were old friends. Watched Andrew shake hands with Mr. Johnson with the kind of enthusiasm he'd never shown when greeting me. The dining room lights blazed as they settled around the table I'd helped pay for with the sale of my home. I ate one cookie, dry and tasteless in my mouth, and went to bed at 8 o'clock because there was nothing else to do. The barn creaked around me like an old ship in a storm, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear laughter floating across the yard, the sound of people who belonged somewhere, who mattered to someone, who weren't hidden away like shameful secrets. That night, I dreamed of John. He was sitting at our old kitchen table in Toledo, sunlight streaming through gingham curtains I'd sewn myself 30 years ago. "Maggie," he said, using the nickname only he had ever used, "what are you doing in that place?" I woke up with tears on my pillow and the crushing realization that I couldn't answer him. The next morning, I woke to the sound of garbage trucks rumbling down Maple Street, their hydraulic whines cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like mechanical screams. My neck ached from the thin pillow, and my hip throbbed where it had pressed against the unforgiving mattress all night. The barn's single radiator clanked and hissed, struggling to push lukewarm air through pipes that probably hadn't been updated since the Eisenhower administration. I shuffled to the tiny kitchenette, if you could call a hot plate and mini fridge a kitchen, and started my morning ritual. Instant coffee because there was no room for a proper coffee maker. Toast made in a toaster oven that heated unevenly, leaving one side charred while the other remained pale. This was my life now, measured in minor inconveniences that felt like major defeats. Through the grimy window, I watched Andrew's house come alive. Lights flickered on in sequence. Master bedroom, bathroom, kitchen. Claire appeared in her silk robe, gliding across their spacious kitchen like a dancer, reaching for what I knew was expensive French roast coffee beans. She'd grind them fresh every morning, filling their house with an aroma that never reached my quarters. I remembered when Andrew was 12, how he'd stumble downstairs in his Superman pajamas, hair sticking up in impossible directions. I'd have pancakes waiting, real ones, from scratch, not the frozen kind, shaped like Mickey Mouse heads because they made him giggle. He'd tell me about his dreams while drowning them in syrup, and I'd listen like every word was poetry. Now he was 42, and I couldn't remember the last time we'd had a real conversation. When had he stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as an obligation? When had love become burden? The answer came floating back to me as I stirred my tasteless coffee. It was gradual, like erosion. It started when John got sick. Andrew was 28 then, fresh out of his MBA program, drowning in student loans and the kind of ambitious debt that comes with believing you deserve the good life immediately. He'd just bought his first house. Not this mansion, but a modest 3-bedroom in the suburbs that stretched his budget to breaking point. When John's diagnosis came, stage 3 lung cancer, despite never smoking a day in his life, Andrew had been supportive, verbally. "Whatever you need, Mom. We're family." But when the bills started mounting, when John's treatments ate through our insurance and started devouring our savings, Andrew's support remained stubbornly verbal. "I wish I could help more," he'd say, adjusting his new watch or straightening his designer tie. "But you know how tight things are right now. The mortgage, Claire's student loans, the wedding expenses were still paying off. So I'd mortgage our house. Twice. I'd liquidate John's retirement fund, paying penalties that made my stomach churn. I'd work double shifts at the department store where I'd been employed for 15 years, standing on concrete floors until my feet swelled and my varicose veins screamed for mercy. I never asked Andrew for money directly, but I'd mentioned casually that we were struggling, that the experimental treatment might help but wasn't covered, that John was losing weight because the medications made him nauseous, and the special nutrition drinks the doctor recommended cost $80 a case. Andrew would nod sympathetically. "That's rough, Mom. Really rough." Then he'd change the subject to his promotion, his new car, the vacation they were planning to Cabo. When John died, Andrew cried at the funeral. Real tears. He held my hand during the service and delivered a beautiful eulogy about what a wonderful father John had been. Afterward, at the reception, I overheard him tell his colleagues, "My dad was my hero. He taught me everything about integrity and hard work." What he didn't mention was that his hero had died broke, bankrupted by medical bills while his son accumulated designer furniture and luxury vacations. But that was just the beginning of my education in one-sided generosity. 2 years after John's death, Andrew called with exciting news. He was starting his own consulting firm. "It's my dream, Mom. Dad would be so proud. But I need some startup capital." The number he mentioned made my pension check look like pocket change. $50,000. "It's not a gift," he'd assured me. "It's an investment. You'll get it back with interest. This is going to change everything for our family." I'd said yes before he finished explaining his business plan. What mother wouldn't want to help her son achieve his dreams? I liquidated what remained of our savings, money I'd planned to use for my own future, and handed it over with a smile. The checks never came. The business thrived. I could see that from the gradual upgrades to their lifestyle. But somehow there was never enough profit to repay his mother's investment. "The first few years are reinvestment years," he'd explain when I gently inquired. "Every penny goes back into growing the company. But once we're established, Mom, once we really take off, you'll be set for life." 3 years later, they bought this house. The mansion with 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a 3-car garage, and a swimming pool. The housewarming party cost more than I spent on food in 6 months. "Business is finally picking up," Andrew had said, toasting their success with champagne that probably cost more per bottle than my monthly utility bill. "We're really starting to see returns on all that hard work." I'd smiled and congratulated them, swallowing the questions that burned in my throat. If business was so good, where was my repayment? If they could afford granite countertops and Italian leather furniture, couldn't they spare something for the woman who'd made it all possible? But I stayed silent, because that's what good mothers do. We celebrate our children's success even when it's built on our sacrifice. We smile when they forget us, forgive when they take advantage, and keep loving even when love becomes a one-way street. The pattern repeated itself over the years. When they needed a down payment for Claire's new car, "It's really for safety, Mom. Her old car was unreliable." I dipped into what remained of my emergency fund. When their furnace died the week before Christmas, "We can't have the pipes freeze, Mom. The damage would be catastrophic." I'd postponed my own roof repairs and handed over another check. Each time, Andrew promised repayment. Each time, something more urgent came up. A business opportunity, a home improvement project, Claire's sister's wedding. My money flowed toward their life like water finding its level, and I learned to live on less and less. Now, sitting in their converted barn with my instant coffee and charity, I finally understood the truth. I hadn't been helping my son achieve his dreams. I'd been funding my own irrelevance. The sound of their garage door opening interrupted my bitter revelation. Andrew's BMW, the one I'd helped him finance 3 years ago when his temporary cash flow problem threatened to hurt his credit rating, pulled out of the driveway. He was heading to the office, to the successful business built on my sacrifices, and he wouldn't think about me once until he needed something else. Claire appeared in their kitchen window, already dressed for her morning yoga class. She'd quit her job 2 years ago, claiming she needed to focus on wellness and self-care. What she meant was that Andrew's business, my business, really, given how much of my money had funded it, was successful enough to support her lifestyle of leisure. She was living the retirement I'd paid for but would never enjoy. My phone buzzed. A text from Andrew. "Can you watch the house today? Cleaner's coming at 2. Just make sure they don't break anything important." I stared at the message, remembering when important had included me, when my presence was welcomed rather than tolerated, when my son saw me as his mother instead of his unpaid caretaker. I typed back, "Of course," because that's what I always said. What I'd been trained to say over decades of putting everyone else's needs before my own. But as I hit send, something small and hard crystallized in my chest. A tiny seed of something I hadn't felt in years. Was I used? The question whispered itself in my mind, And for the first time in my 76 years, I didn't immediately push it away. The cleaners arrived exactly at 2 o'clock. 3 women in matching blue uniforms who looked at me with the polite confusion of people trying to place an unexpected face. I was sitting on the front porch, Andrew's front porch, reading a library book, my only entertainment that didn't cost money I couldn't spare. "Are you Mrs. Morrison?" the team leader asked, checking her clipboard with professional efficiency. I almost laughed at the bitter irony. "No, I'm Margaret, the mother-in-law. I'm just watching the house." The woman nodded without really seeing me, already focused on the task ahead. I might as well have been another piece of furniture, something to work around rather than acknowledge. It was a feeling I'd grown accustomed to in this house, existing in the spaces between other people's lives, present but not participating, visible but not seen. I watched them work for 3 hours, transforming an already pristine house into something magazine perfect. They scrubbed baseboards I couldn't see dirt on, polished fixtures that already gleamed, arranged throw pillows with the precision of museum curators. Every surface was treated with reverence, every object handled with care. No one had ever cleaned my barn. In 6 months of living there, not once had anyone suggested that my charming guest house might benefit from professional attention. The mouse droppings behind my mini fridge were apparently part of its rustic charm. When Claire returned from her yoga class, she breezed past me with a distracted wave, already pulling out her phone to document the cleaner's work. She'd post photos later on social media. Blessed life. Home is, where the heart is, grateful. Racking up likes from friends who admired her perfect life and beautiful house. The house I'd helped pay for. The life I'd helped fund. The gratitude that never seemed to extend to the woman living in their backyard. That evening, as I microwaved a frozen dinner in my cramped quarters, I noticed a black town car pulling into their circular driveway. Through my window, I watched an elderly couple emerge, the woman elegantly dressed in a navy suit, the man distinguished in his silver hair and expensive overcoat. Andrew and Claire rushed out to greet them with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for visiting celebrities. Hugs, exclamations, laughter that carried across the yard like wind chimes. I watched my son transform into the charming host, the successful businessman, the devoted husband and father. Though they had no children, a fact that still puzzled me. I was puzzling over this when my phone rang. "Mom?" Andrew's voice carried that particular tone of strained patience I'd learned to recognize. "Listen, we have some very important guests tonight. Claire's parents are here from Florida, and we're having dinner with some potential investors. It's really crucial for the business." I waited for him to continue, sensing there was more. "The thing is, Claire's parents don't really know about your situation. They think you're still living independently back in Ohio. Claire mentioned it might be confusing if they saw you here, you know? They might not understand the whole arrangement." My situation. The whole arrangement. As if my homelessness was a business deal rather than their solution to the inconvenience of having an aging mother. "What are you asking me to do, Andrew? Could you, maybe, stay inside tonight, just until they leave tomorrow morning? I know it's a lot to ask, but this deal could set us up for life. And Claire's parents, they're kind of old-fashioned about family obligations. They might not get why you're not living with family or in a proper facility." A proper facility. The words hit me like a slap. After everything I'd given, everything I'd sacrificed, my own son was discussing me like I was a problem to be managed, hidden away until more important people finished their business. "I'll stay inside," I heard myself say, because the alternative, explaining that I actually had nowhere else to go, was too humiliating to voice. "Thanks, Mom. I really appreciate it. I'll make it up to you, I promise." Another promise. Another IOU from a man whose debts to me had long since stopped being tracked. I hung up and closed my curtains, effectively sealing myself into my exile. Through the thin walls, I could hear their dinner party beginning, car doors slamming, voices raised in greeting, the pop of wine corks and clink of expensive glassware. I ate my microwaved meal in darkness, unwilling to let even the glow of my single lamp betray my presence to the important people who weren't supposed to know I existed. But sometime around 9 o'clock, curiosity overcame shame. I crept to my window and peered through a gap in the curtains, watching the scene unfold in their brilliantly lit dining room like observing a play from the cheap seats. Claire's parents were everything I'd expected. Polished, sophisticated, the kind of people who'd raised a daughter to marry well and live comfortably. They sat at the head of Andrew's mahogany table, presiding over a meal I was sure had been catered from some expensive restaurant. But it was the other couple that caught my attention. Younger than me, but not by much. They had the confident bearing of people accustomed to being courted, flattered, convinced to part with their money. The man gestured expansively while talking, and everyone else leaned in to catch his words like he was sharing state secrets. I was so focused on trying to read lips and interpret gestures that I almost missed it. Almost. Claire's mother, a woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair and pearls that probably cost more than my annual income, was asking a question. I could see her lips moving, her head tilted with polite interest. And then I saw Andrew's response. Clear as day, he mouthed the words that shattered my world completely. She died 3 years ago. He was talking about me. To Claire's parents, to these potential investors, to anyone who might find an aging mother inconvenient. I was already dead. The wine glass I'd been holding slipped from my numb fingers and crashed to the floor. Red wine spreading across the barn's cheap linoleum like blood. But I barely noticed. I was too busy processing the revelation that my own son had erased me from existence, rather than admit I was living in poverty in his backyard. To him, I wasn't just invisible, I was dead. I sank to my knees among the broken glass and spilled wine, my body finally catching up with what my heart had known for months. I wasn't Andrew's mother anymore. I was his shame, his secret, his discarded past that interfered with the story he wanted to tell about his success. How long had he been telling people I was dead? How many conversations had he had where my non-existence was more convenient than the truth? How many condolences had he accepted for a mother who was still breathing, still loving him, still hoping that someday he'd remember who I used to be to him? The dinner party continued without pause. No one noticed the light that had briefly flickered in the barn. No one heard the glass break or the heart shatter. The important people kept talking, kept laughing, kept living their lives while I bled invisible wounds on my knees among the shards of what remained of my illusions. I stayed there for a long time, staring at the broken glass and thinking about broken promises, broken dreams, broken relationships that couldn't be swept up and thrown away as easily as wine-stained fragments. When I finally stood, my knees creaked like old hinges, and I felt every one of my 76 years settling into my bones like winter cold. I cleaned up the mess methodically, each piece of glass a small decision, each swipe of the paper towel a tiny act of moving forward. But something had changed in those minutes on the floor. Something had crystallized in the space between heartbreak and rage, between love and self-preservation. For the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about what Andrew needed. I was thinking about what I deserved. And what I deserved wasn't to be hidden away like a shameful secret while strangers toasted my son's success with money that had once been mine. I deserved better than being dead to the world while still drawing breath. I deserved to stop being a ghost in my own life. The question that had whispered through my mind that morning now roared with the force of absolute certainty. I had been used. Completely. Systematically. Without mercy or gratitude. And tomorrow I was going to do something about it. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my tiny table with John's old calculator, the one with the cracked display that still worked if you pressed the buttons just right, and did something I should have done years ago. I added up everything. Every loan that was never repaid. Every emergency that had somehow become my responsibility. Every investment in Andrew's dreams that had yielded returns for everyone except the investor. The numbers stared back at me from pages of yellow legal pad, a mathematical proof of my own systematic destruction. $237,000. That's what I'd given my son over the years. Not including the countless smaller amounts, the grocery money when they were between paychecks, the utility payments when their cash flow was tight, the credit card bills I'd mysteriously inherited when they consolidated their debt. $237,000. More than most people make in 5 years. Enough to buy a small house, fund a comfortable retirement, or simply live with dignity instead of eating microwaved meals in a converted barn. When the sun finally rose, painting the sky the color of old bruises. I was ready. At 8:30, just as Andrew would be having his first cup of artisanal coffee, I walked across the yard to the main house. My footsteps felt different somehow. Heavier, more purposeful. I wasn't sneaking or apologizing or trying to make myself invisible. I was walking like I had a right to be there. Because I did. I'd bought that right with interest. I found Andrew in his home office, the one with windows overlooking the garden I wasn't allowed to enjoy. He was on a video call, gesturing enthusiastically at his laptop screen while wearing a shirt that probably cost more than my monthly pension. I knocked once and walked in without waiting for permission. Andrew looked up, startled, then made quick apologies to whoever was on the screen. "Sorry, folks. Family emergency. Can we pick this up in an hour?" He closed the laptop and turned to me with that practiced smile, the one he'd perfected for managing difficult clients and apparently difficult mothers. "Mom, what's up? You look intense." "I heard you last night," I said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk without being invited. "Through the window. You told Claire's parents I was dead." The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. "Mom, I can explain. Can you? Can you explain how a living woman becomes dead for the convenience of a dinner party?" He fumbled for words, his hands fluttering like nervous birds. "It's complicated. Claire's parents, they have very traditional views about family. They wouldn't understand why you're not in a nursing home or assisted living. They'd think we were being irresponsible." Irresponsible. I let the word hang in the air between us. "Like letting your mother live in a barn while you tell people she's dead?" "It's not a barn, Mom. It's a converted—" "Andrew." My voice cut through his excuses like John's old saw through pine boards. "I've added it up. Everything I've given you over the years. $237,000. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "That's not counting the smaller amounts. The hundreds here and there that I stopped tracking because I told myself it was just helping family. But it adds up, doesn't it? Everything always adds up eventually. Mom, those were investments." "In what? Your ability to lie to investors? Your talent for hiding your own mother like a dirty secret?" I leaned forward, and for the first time in years, Andrew leaned back. "I want it back." "What?" "My money. I want it back. All of it. With interest." Andrew laughed, but it sounded more like a bark. "Mom, that's not how it works. Those were gifts. Loans between family members. You can't just—" "Can't I?" I stood up, and suddenly the office felt smaller, as if my presence was expanding to fill spaces I'd never dared occupy before. "Watch me." That's when Claire appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of raised voices. She was dressed for her morning Pilates class, all pastel athletic wear and carefully tousled hair. "What's going on in here?" I could hear shouting from the kitchen. "Your mother-in-law wants us to pay back money she gave us years ago," Andrew said, his voice tight with the kind of panic I'd never heard from him before. "She thinks it was all loans." Claire's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together in confusion that looked almost genuine. "But Margaret, you said those were gifts. To help us get started. Family, helping family. Family," I repeated, tasting the word like spoiled milk. "Is that what you call hiding me from your parents? What you call making me live in a barn while you tell investors I'm dead?" Claire's face cycled through several expressions. Surprise, embarrassment, calculation. "You were listening? That's a violation of privacy, Margaret." The audacity of it stole my breath for a moment. I was violating their privacy by existing within earshot of their lies about my existence. "I want my money back," I repeated, because sometimes the truth is simple enough to fit in one sentence. "All of it. By the end of the month." Andrew and Claire exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Panic, conspiracy, the wordless communication of people who'd practiced deception together long enough to make it an art form. "Mom, be reasonable," Andrew said, switching to his negotiation voice, the one he probably used with difficult clients. "That's not realistic. The business has expenses overhead. We can't just liquidate, then sell something." I gestured around the office at the expensive furniture and artwork that decorated their lives. "Sell the boat you bought last summer. Sell Claire's car. Sell this house." "This house?" Claire's voice went shrill. "This is our home. Built with my money. That's not fair." Claire stepped fully into the room now, her composure crumbling like wet tissue paper. "We've taken care of you. We gave you a place to live when you had nowhere else to go. You gave me a barn. A converted barn, with its own entrance and privacy. Privacy." I almost smiled at that. "Is that what we're calling isolation now?" Andrew tried to regain control of the conversation. "Mom, let's all calm down and discuss this rationally. What do you really want here? What would make you happy? What would make me happy?" As if happiness was a reasonable request after decades of systematic exploitation. "I want my dignity back," I said quietly. "I want to stop being your dirty secret. I want to stop pretending that living in your backyard like a vagrant is some kind of generous arrangement." "You're not a vagrant," Claire protested. "You're family. Then why did you tell your parents I was dead?" Silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket. Outside, a lawnmower started up somewhere in the neighborhood, the sound of normal people maintaining normal lives while mine imploded in real time. Finally, Andrew spoke. "We'll figure something out. Give us some time to liquidate some assets. Talk to our financial advisor." "1 month," I interrupted. "I want a check for $250,000. That's with interest. By the 15th of next month." "250?" Andrew's voice cracked. "Mom, that's not reasonable. Neither is telling people I'm dead while I'm living in your barn." I walked toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and I'll be joining you for dinner tonight. All of us. Like a family." "Mom, we can't." "You can, and you will. Because I'm not dead, Andrew. Despite what you tell people, I'm very much alive. And it's time everyone got reacquainted with that fact." I left them there, staring at each other across the wreckage of their comfortable lies. As I walked back to the barn, I could hear their voices rising again. Frantic whispers, desperate planning, the sound of people realizing that their victim had finally learned to bite back. For the first time in months, I was actually looking forward to dinner. Because tonight, the ghost of Margaret Morrison was going to rejoin the land of the living, whether her family liked it or not. And judging by the panicked voices still echoing from Andrew's office, they definitely didn't like it. But for once in my life, what they liked didn't matter more than what I needed. And what I needed was to stop being dead while I was still breathing. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in 6 months. I left the property without asking permission. I walked to the end of their long driveway, past the manicured hedges and decorative iron gates, and kept walking. My legs felt shaky at first, not from weakness, but from the unfamiliar sensation of moving through the world without apologizing for my existence. The nearest bank was only 8 blocks away, though it might as well have been 8 miles for how foreign the journey felt. I'd been so contained within the boundaries of Andrew's property, so trained to remain invisible, that simply walking down a public sidewalk felt like an act of rebellion. The afternoon sun warmed my face in a way the barn's north-facing window never could. I passed other people, a mother pushing a stroller, an elderly man walking his terrier, teenagers on skateboards, and for the first time in months, I made eye contact. I nodded. I smiled. I existed in the world instead of hiding from it. At First National Bank, I asked to speak with someone about my accounts. The customer service representative, a young woman named Jessica with kind eyes and a gentle manner, pulled up my information on her computer screen. "Mrs. Morrison, I see you have both a checking and savings account with us. How can I help you today?" "I need to understand something," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "Over the years, I've written quite a few large checks to my son. Is there any record of what those totaled?" Jessica's fingers clicked across her keyboard. "I can generate a report of all checks over a certain amount." "What time frame are we looking at?" "The last 10 years. She worked quietly for several minutes while I sat in the uncomfortable chair and tried to ignore the voice in my head that kept insisting I was being foolish, unreasonable, vindictive. That voice sounded remarkably like Andrew's. "Here we are," Jessica said, turning her monitor toward me. "Checks made out to Andrew Morrison over $10,000, dating back 10 years. The numbers on the screen made my chest tight. It was even worse than my middle-of-the-night calculations. When you added in the cashier's checks for his business loans, the wire transfers for his house purchases, the emergency payments that had seemed so urgent at the time, the total came to nearly $300,000. Would you like me to print this for you? Jessica asked gently. Yes, please. She handed me the report, and I stared at it like archaeological evidence of my own systematic destruction. Each entry told a story: Andrew's wedding expenses, his business startup costs, his mortgage down payments, his debt consolidations. A decade of my financial life flowing in one direction, toward a son who'd never sent a single dollar back. Mrs. Morrison? Jessica's voice was careful, professional. Is everything all right? I looked up at this young woman who was probably my granddaughter's age, if I'd had granddaughters, who was treating me with more courtesy and respect than I'd received from my own family in months. I think I need to make some changes to my accounts, I said. What kind of changes? I want to remove my son as a beneficiary, and I want to set up automatic transfers so I can't access large amounts quickly. Can you do that? Jessica nodded. We call those savings controls. Many people find them helpful for managing their finances. You can set limits on withdrawals, require waiting periods for large amounts, things like that. As she walked me through the options, I felt something loosening in my chest. For the first time in years, I was making decisions about my own money without considering how they might affect Andrew's cash flow or Claire's comfort level. I'd also like to change my address, I said, for my statements and correspondence. Of course. What's the new address? I hesitated. I didn't have one yet. Could you hold mail for me temporarily? I'm in transition. Jessica's eyes held understanding without judgment. Absolutely. We can hold your mail for up to 60 days while you sort things out. By the time I left the bank, I had a folder full of documents that felt like armor against future manipulation. Account protections, beneficiary changes, a clear record of exactly how much of my life I'd signed away in the name of maternal love. My next stop was 3 blocks away. Thompson and Associates, attorneys at law. I'd looked them up in the phone book that morning, chosen them because their advertisement mentioned elder law and estate planning. The receptionist, a woman about my age with silver hair and laugh lines, greeted me warmly. Can I help you? I need to speak with someone about my will. And possibly about financial abuse. The words felt strange in my mouth. Financial abuse. As if what Andrew had done was criminal rather than simply disappointing. But sitting there in that law office, surrounded by books and certificates that spoke of justice and protection, I began to wonder if there really was a difference. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Robert Thompson, a man in his 50s who listened to my story without interruption, taking notes on a yellow legal pad with the focused attention of someone who'd heard similar tales before. Mrs. Morrison, he said when I finished, what you're describing is unfortunately more common than you might think. Adult children who view elderly parents as ATMs rather than people. The law does provide some protections, but first let me ask, what outcome are you hoping for? I want my independence back, I said. I want to stop being someone's retirement plan. And I want to make sure that if something happens to me, my money goes somewhere useful instead of funding their next vacation. Mr. Thompson nodded. We can absolutely help with that. A new will. Power of attorney documents that protect you. Maybe even explore whether some of these transactions qualify for recovery under elder abuse statutes. Recovery? If someone has taken advantage of an elderly person's trust to obtain money or property, there are sometimes legal remedies. It's not always easy to prove, but given the pattern you've described, he let the sentence hang there while I processed the possibility that I might not have to simply write off $300,000 as the cost of learning who my son really was. What would that involve? Documentation, bank records, which you've already started gathering, evidence of the promises that were made and broken, testimony about your living conditions and how you've been treated. The thought of testifying against Andrew, of making our family drama public record, made my stomach churn. But then I remembered last night's dinner party, remembered being told to hide while my son informed strangers that I was dead. How long would something like that take? Months, potentially years. And there's no guarantee of success. But, Mrs. Morrison, even if we never file a lawsuit, having proper documentation can be powerful leverage for negotiations. I thought about Andrew's panicked face this morning, about Claire's shrill protests, about how quickly their confidence had crumbled when I'd finally pushed back. Let's start with the new will, I said. And the documentation. We can decide about the rest later. By the time I walked out of the law office, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me of better times. I had appointments scheduled, papers to sign, a plan that extended beyond tomorrow's confrontation. For the first time in months, I had somewhere to be that wasn't the barn. I walked back slowly, in no hurry to return to my exile. Along the way, I stopped at a small cafe I'd passed earlier, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and local artwork on the walls. I ordered coffee. Real coffee, not instant, and a piece of apple pie that reminded me of the ones I used to bake for Andrew when he was small. The waitress, a woman about Claire's age, chatted with me while I ate. Normal conversation about the weather, the local news, the coffee shop's history in the neighborhood. She didn't know I was homeless or dependent or anyone's burden. To her, I was just another customer, another person worthy of basic human interaction. It was almost dark when I finally made my way back up Andrew's driveway. The house blazed with light, and I could see figures moving behind the dining room windows. They were waiting for me, probably planning their strategy, marshaling their arguments about why I was being unreasonable. But something had changed during my day of freedom. I'd remembered what it felt like to make my own decisions, to move through the world as a person rather than a problem. I'd tasted independence again, and it was sweeter than any pie. As I approached the barn, I saw Andrew standing by my door, checking his watch with the impatient gesture of someone who'd been waiting longer than he'd expected. "Mom, where have you been? We've been worried sick." The lie came so easily to him that I almost believed it myself. Almost. "I had errands to run," I said, unlocking my door with hands that didn't shake. "Banking, legal matters. The kind of things people do when they're planning their futures. Legal matters?" The worry in his voice was real now, different from his practiced concern. "Mom, what kind of legal matters?" I paused in my doorway and looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd once been my baby, my little boy, my greatest pride and deepest love. When had he become this stranger who saw me as an asset to be managed rather than a person to be cherished? The kind that happen when someone decides to stop being dead while they're still breathing, I said. Then I went inside and closed the door, leaving him standing in the gathering darkness with nothing but his fear for company. Tomorrow would bring the dinner I'd demanded, the confrontation I'd been avoiding for months. But tonight, for the first time since I'd arrived at Andrew's house, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Because ghosts don't have bank accounts or lawyers or the power to change their wills, and I was no longer a ghost. I chose my outfit carefully that evening. Not the worn cardigan and faded slacks I'd been hiding in for months, but the navy dress with the pearl buttons that John had bought me for our 40th anniversary. I'd packed it when I moved here, thinking there might be special occasions, family celebrations where I'd want to look my best. I'd been right about the special occasion. I just hadn't known I'd be celebrating my own resurrection. The dress still fit, though it hung a little loose. Stress and microwave dinners had stolen pounds I couldn't afford to lose. But when I looked in the barn's cracked mirror, I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Not a burden or a ghost or a shameful secret, but Margaret Morrison, a woman who'd raised a son, buried a husband, survived 7 decades of whatever life threw at her. A woman who was done apologizing for taking up space in the world. I walked across the yard at exactly 6 o'clock, my low heels clicking on the flagstone path with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Through the dining room windows, I could see them waiting. Andrew pacing near the fireplace, Claire rearranging flowers that didn't need rearranging, both of them wearing the strained expressions of people preparing for battle. I didn't knock. This was my house too, purchased with my money, maintained with my contributions. I walked through the front door like I owned the place. Because in a very real sense, I did. "Mom!" Andrew's voice was too bright, artificially cheerful. "You look nice." "Doesn't she look nice, honey?" Claire turned from the dining table, her smile as brittle as autumn leaves. "Beautiful, Margaret. That dress is so vintage." Vintage. A polite way of saying old, outdated, irrelevant, but I'd learned not to flinch at their small cruelties. "Thank you," I said simply, taking my seat at the dining table without being invited. The chair at the far end, furthest from both of them, the spot reserved for unwelcome guests and difficult relatives. The table was set with their wedding china, the expensive Lenox pattern Claire had registered for at Bloomingdale's. I remembered the bridal shower where I'd admired these plates, how I'd scraped together money I couldn't spare to buy them the serving platter that now held tonight's dinner. Takeout from some upscale restaurant, transferred to fancy dishes to maintain the illusion of domestic perfection. "So," Andrew said, settling into his chair with the forced casualness of someone trying to control an uncontrollable situation, "how was your day? You seemed busy." "Productive," I replied, unfolding my napkin with deliberate care. "I accomplished quite a lot." Claire poured wine for herself and Andrew, pointedly skipping my glass. The gesture was petty, but telling. Even now, they were excluding me from their circle, marking me as different, lesser, unwelcome. I reached for the bottle and poured my own wine, a generous glass of what I was sure was expensive Cabernet. If I was funding their lifestyle, I might as well enjoy some of its benefits. "Mom, about this morning," Andrew began, his negotiation voice firmly in place. "I think there might have been some misunderstandings." "No misunderstandings," I interrupted, taking a sip of wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "I understand perfectly. You've been using me as your personal bank for years while treating me like a shameful secret. And now that I've finally said enough, you're panicking." Claire's fork clinked against her plate. "That's not fair, Margaret. We've provided you with housing, included you in our lives." "Included me?" I set down my wine glass with perhaps more force than necessary. "Claire, you've hidden me from your parents. You've asked me to stay locked in the barn when guests come over. Last night, my own son told people I was dead, rather than admit I was living in his backyard like a vagrant." "It's not like that," Andrew started. "Then what is it like, Andrew? Explain it to me. Explain how a mother who gave you nearly $300,000 ends up eating frozen dinners alone in a converted barn while you tell investors she's dead." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Outside, I could hear the neighbor's dog barking, the distant sound of traffic, the normal sounds of a world going about its business while we sat in our bubble of dysfunction and denial. Finally, Claire spoke, her voice carefully modulated. "Margaret, I think you're having some memory issues. 300,000. That seems exaggerated." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment, I almost doubted myself. Almost. But I had the bank records in my purse, the printed proof of my own systematic destruction. I pulled out the folder and spread the papers across their expensive tablecloth. "Bank records don't lie, Claire. Unlike people." Andrew's face went pale as he recognized the documents. Years of transactions laid out in black and white, each one a small betrayal that had seemed reasonable at the time. "These were loans," he said weakly. "Investments. You said yourself you wanted to help us get started. Show me one payment back," I said quietly. "One single repayment. $1 of interest. One acknowledgement that these were anything other than gifts extorted through emotional manipulation." "Mom, that's not—" I kept track, Andrew. "I have dates, amounts, the reasons you gave for needing money. Your business startup that was going to make us all rich. Claire's car that was essential for safety. The roof repairs that couldn't wait. The debt consolidation that was going to get you back on track. 20 years of emergencies that were always more important than my financial security." Claire was staring at the papers like they might burst into flames. "Those were family obligations. When family needs help, family." I laughed, and the sound was bitter even to my own ears. "Tell me, Claire, what family obligations have you fulfilled for me? What emergencies of mine have you solved? What help have you provided beyond a barn to hide in and take out dinners I'm not supposed to share? We gave you a place to live." Andrew's composure was cracking, his voice rising. "When you lost your house?" "I didn't lose my house. I sold it to come live with my family, because you convinced me that's what families do." "And the money from that sale? Where do you think that went, Andrew?" He didn't answer, but I could see the knowledge in his eyes. The down payment for this house, the one they'd claimed was their achievement, their success story. "I helped buy this house," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "I furnished it with money I'd saved for my retirement. I funded your business, your lifestyle, your wife's yoga classes and shopping sprees. And my reward was being told I was dead to avoid the inconvenience of explaining why your mother lives in a barn. It's not a barn. Claire started automatically, then stopped herself. You're right, I said. It's not a barn. It's a prison. A place to keep the old woman who knew too much about where your money really came from. Andrew slammed his hand on the table, making the wine glasses jump. Enough. You're being dramatic and unreasonable. Those were gifts, freely given. You can't just decide years later that you want them back. Can I? I stood up and somehow the movement felt powerful rather than shaky. Watch me. Mom, please. Andrew's anger dissolved into something that looked almost like panic. Be reasonable. We can work something out, but you can't expect us to just liquidate everything. Why not? I liquidated everything for you. My house, my savings, my retirement, my security. I gave you my entire life's work, and you used it to build a lifestyle that doesn't include the woman who made it possible. That's not true. Claire jumped up, her careful facade finally cracking completely. You're ungrateful. We've taken care of you, given you a home. You've given me a barn and told people I'm dead. Because you're embarrassing. The words exploded out of her like poison from a wound. You're old and pathetic and you make us look like failures. Every time someone sees you, they ask questions we don't want to answer. The honesty was brutal, but liberating. Finally, no more pretense about family love or mutual obligation. Finally, the truth. There it is, I said quietly. The real reason. Not memory issues or misunderstandings or family dynamics. I'm embarrassing. I make you look bad. The woman who funded your success story doesn't fit the narrative you want to tell. Andrew was staring at his wife in horror. Claire, you can't just... Why not? She turned on him with the fury of someone who'd been holding back for too long. She's ruining everything. Your business partners are starting to ask questions. My friends want to know why we have an old woman living in our backyard. This whole situation is insane. This whole situation, I said, gathering my papers with hands that no longer trembled, is over. What does that mean? Andrew's voice was small, uncertain. It means I'm done. Done funding your lifestyle, done hiding your shame, done pretending that what you've done to me has anything to do with love. I stood and looked at both of them, these people I'd sacrificed everything for, who'd repaid that sacrifice with exile and humiliation. I want every penny back, Andrew. Every loan, every gift, every dollar I've poured into your success story. You have 30 days. That's impossible. Then sell the house, liquidate the business, cash out your investments. I don't care how you do it, but you're going to return what you stole. Stole? Claire's voice went shrill. We didn't steal anything. Then what would you call taking money from an elderly woman under false pretenses and using it to fund a lifestyle that excludes her from its benefits? The question hung in the air like smoke. Neither of them had an answer, because we all knew what that was called. And Claire? I turned to face her directly. I'm not dead. I'm very much alive, and I'm done being your dirty secret. I walked toward the door, leaving them sitting among the wreckage of their comfortable lies. Where are you going? Andrew called after me. To start living, I said without turning around. Something I should have done a long time ago. As I stepped out into the evening air, I heard Claire's voice behind me, sharp with desperation. She can't do this. She can't just destroy our lives. But I could, and I was. Because sometimes the only way to stop being dead is to bury the people who killed you. 3 days after the dinner confrontation, I found myself standing in front of a small apartment building on Elm Street, holding a set of keys that felt heavier than they had any right to. The building was nothing fancy. Red brick, probably built in the 1950s, with window boxes that someone actually tended, and a front door that had been painted a cheerful yellow. It was perfect. The previous tenant was here for 12 years. The landlord, Mrs. Chen, had told me during the viewing. She only moved because she wanted to be closer to her grandchildren. She loved this place. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with actual counter space, and a living room with windows that faced east. Morning light, something I hadn't seen in months. The rent was reasonable. Not cheap, but manageable on my pension if I was careful. And after years of funding Andrew's lifestyle, careful was something I'd relearned how to be. Mrs. Chen had asked for references, and I'd panicked for a moment. Who could I list? My son, who was currently pretending I was dead. The lawyer who was helping me rewrite my will. The bank teller who'd helped me document my own financial abuse. But then I'd remembered something John used to say. Maggie, you've been taking care of people your whole life. Maybe it's time to let someone take care of you. I'd listed Mr. Thompson, my lawyer, and Jessica from the bank. Professional references for a woman starting over at 76. And somehow, that had been enough. Now, standing in my own space for the first time in 6 months, I felt something I'd forgotten existed. Peace. The apartment came furnished with the basics. A sofa that had seen better days but was clean and comfortable. A dining table with only one wobbly leg. A bed that didn't creak when I sat on it. The previous tenant had left curtains, and someone had thoughtfully placed a small plant on the windowsill that was somehow still alive, despite being abandoned. I named it Hope. The first thing I did was make coffee. Real coffee, from beans I'd bought at the grocery store down the street. Brewed in a coffee maker that was mine to use whenever I wanted. I sat at my table, in my kitchen, drinking my coffee while watching the sun rise through my windows. No one could tell me to hide. No one could pretend I didn't exist. No one could make me feel ashamed for occupying space in the world. For the first time in months, I cried tears that weren't born of pain. That afternoon, I did something radical. I went shopping for myself. Not necessities grabbed hastily from the pharmacy while running errands for Andrew and Claire, but actual shopping for things I wanted rather than needed. At the department store, I found myself in the women's section, touching fabrics I hadn't worn in years. When had I stopped buying clothes that made me feel attractive? When had I started dressing like I was trying to disappear? The saleswoman, Maria, was about my age and had the kind of smile that reached her eyes. "Are you looking for something special?" "I'm starting over," I said, and the words felt strange but wonderful in my mouth. "I need everything, I guess. A whole new wardrobe for a whole new life." Maria's smile widened. "Now that sounds like fun. What's your style? What makes you feel like yourself? When was the last time someone had asked me what I wanted? What made me feel like myself?" I almost didn't know how to answer. But as Maria pulled options from the racks, a soft cashmere sweater in sage green, slacks that actually fit my frame, a dress the color of autumn leaves, I remembered. I remembered the woman who'd taught Sunday school in bold floral prints, who'd worn red lipstick to PTA meetings, who'd danced with her husband at their anniversary parties. I tried on clothes while Maria waited patiently outside the dressing room, offering honest opinions about fit and color. When I emerged wearing the green sweater and well-fitted pants, she clapped her hands together. Now that's a woman who knows who she is. I stared at myself in the three-way mirror. The woman looking back at me had good posture, clear eyes, and clothing that suggested she valued herself. She looked like someone who might have opinions worth hearing, stories worth telling, a life worth living. She looked alive. I bought everything. The sweater, the pants, the autumn dress, a coat that made me feel elegant rather than invisible. I bought undergarments that fit properly and shoes that were comfortable but stylish. I bought a purse that wasn't falling apart and a wallet that wasn't held together with tape. The total made me wince, but then I remembered I had money. Not Andrew's money, not money I was hoarding for the next family emergency, but my own pension, my own social security, my own resources to spend on my own life. What a concept. That evening, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Dorothy Finch had been my closest friend back in Toledo, the woman who'd sat with me during John's chemo treatments, who'd helped me pack when I decided to move to Chicago to be closer to Andrew. The phone rang 4 times, and I almost hung up. What if she was angry that I'd lost touch? What if she didn't want to hear from someone who'd essentially vanished from her life? "Hello? Dorothy? It's Margaret. Margaret Morrison." A pause, then a delighted laugh. "Maggie! Oh my goodness. Where have you been? I've been worried sick. I've called and called, but your phone was disconnected, and Andrew told me you were settling in beautifully with them and didn't want to be bothered with calls from your old life." My old life. As if the 40 years we'd been friends was something I'd outgrown rather than something Andrew had decided was inconvenient. "Dorothy, I'm so sorry. Things have been complicated." Complicated how? Are you all right? You sound different. Different. I was different. Stronger, maybe. More myself than I'd been in months. I'm better than I've been in a long time, actually. I have so much to tell you. We talked for 2 hours. I told her everything. The barn, the financial exploitation, being hidden from dinner guests, being declared dead for the convenience of a dinner party. Dorothy listened with the kind of outrage that only a true friend can muster on your behalf. "That son of yours needs his backside kicked," she said finally. "And that wife of his. The nerve of some people." "I've handled it," I said, and realized I actually had. "I'm living on my own now. Small apartment, but it's mine. And I'm taking back what they stole from me. Good for you. Though I still say someone should kick Andrews behind." Dorothy had always been direct. It was one of the things I'd missed most about her. "Actually," she continued, "I have some news that might interest you. Remember the book club we used to run at the community center? Of course. We'd read everything from romance novels to literary fiction, gathering once a month to discuss books and life in equal measure. Well, it fell apart after you left. Turns out you were the one who kept us all organized. But I've been thinking about starting it up again, maybe meeting at different people's houses. Would you be interested in joining us remotely? Video calls are all the rage now. Remote book club. Technology connecting me to people who actually wanted my company, my opinions, my presence in their lives. I'd love that, I said, and meant it. After we hung up, I sat in my little living room with Hope the plant and thought about the day. Shopping for myself, buying things that made me feel good, reconnecting with someone who valued my friendship. Normal activities that felt revolutionary after months of exile and invisibility. This was what life looked like when you weren't apologizing for existing. The next morning, I woke up naturally instead of being startled awake by the barn's rattling radiator or the sounds of Andrew and Claire starting their day without acknowledging mine. I made coffee, toasted bread that I'd chosen myself, and sat by my east-facing window to watch the world wake up. Across the street, a woman about my age was tending to her garden, deadheading roses and watering flower boxes. She looked up and waved when she saw me in the window, a friendly gesture between neighbors who didn't know each other's stories but respected each other's right to exist in the same space. I waved back, and the simple interaction felt like a gift. That afternoon, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I went to a museum. The Art Institute was only a 20-minute bus ride away, and I had nowhere else I needed to be, no one else's schedule to accommodate. I wandered through galleries full of paintings that had outlived their creators, sculptures that spoke across centuries, photographs that captured moments of beauty and truth. I sat for a long time in front of a particular painting, a woman alone in a garden, her face turned toward the light, her expression peaceful and self-contained. The placard said it was titled Woman in Solitude, but I thought it looked more like Woman in Freedom. An elderly man sitting on the bench beside me noticed my attention to the painting. "Beautiful, isn't it?" "Yes," I said. "She looks content." My wife always said that being alone and being lonely are two different things. That woman there? She's alone, but she's not lonely. She's complete in herself. Complete in herself. What a foreign concept after decades of defining myself through other people's needs. "Your wife sounds wise," I said. He smiled. She was. I miss her every day. But I try to remember what she taught me about finding peace in your own company. We sat in comfortable silence after that, two elderly people contemplating art and loss, and the strange gift of discovering who you are when all the external definitions fall away. When I got home that evening, there was a message on my new answering machine. Andrew's voice, tight with barely controlled panic. "Mom, we need to talk. This whole situation is getting out of hand. Call me back." I deleted the message without calling back. Instead, I made myself dinner. A proper meal with vegetables and protein and attention to flavor rather than just sustenance. I set my small table with the dishes I'd chosen, poured myself a glass of the wine I'd bought because I liked the label, and ate while reading a book I'd picked up at the museum gift shop. Outside my window, the world continued its business. People walked dogs, children played in the small park across the street, couples strolled hand in hand through the evening light. Normal life, the kind I'd forgotten I was entitled to participate in. Tomorrow, I would call Mr. Thompson to check on the progress of my new will. I would grocery shop for foods I actually wanted to eat. I would water Hope and maybe buy her a companion plant. I would continue the radical act of living for myself. And for the first time in years, the future felt like something to anticipate rather than endure. 6 months later, I was tending to my window garden when the phone rang. 3 plants now shared the sill with Hope: basil, mint, and a small orchid that Dorothy had sent for my birthday. My birthday that I'd celebrated with friends from the book club, sharing cake and laughter in my small apartment that somehow felt more spacious than Andrew's mansion ever had. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was devastatingly familiar. "Mom, it's Andrew." I almost hung up. Almost. But something in his tone, not the practiced manipulation I'd grown accustomed to, but something raw and desperate, made me pause. "Hello, Andrew. I'm calling from a payphone. Claire changed all our numbers. She left me, Mom. Took half of everything and filed for divorce. She said living with the crazy mother situation was destroying her mental health." The crazy mother situation. Even in his moment of crisis, I was still defined as a problem rather than a person. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. Not sorry for him necessarily, but sorry for the waste of it all. The marriage built on pretense, the family destroyed by greed, the years we'd all lost to lies and manipulation. The house is in foreclosure. The business is failing. She cleaned out our joint accounts before she left. His voice cracked slightly. "Mom, I know I messed up. I know I treated you terribly. But I don't have anyone else to call." There it was. The confession wrapped in another request. Even now, even after everything, he was calling because he needed something. Not because he'd realized I was worth apologizing to for my own sake. "What do you want, Andrew?" "I want to make things right. I want to pay you back, but I need help getting back on my feet first. Maybe we could work out a payment plan." I laughed. Actually laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise both of us. "Andrew, do you hear yourself? You're asking the woman you declared dead to help fund your recovery from the consequences of stealing her life savings. I never stole. You took my money under false pretenses. You used my love for you as leverage to drain my accounts. You hid me away like a shameful secret and told people I was dead rather than admit you were taking advantage of an elderly woman." My voice was calm, matter of fact. The anger was gone, replaced by something much more powerful: clarity. I know. But Mom, if you could just— No. The word hung in the air between us, simple and final. "No, Andrew, I can't help you. But more than that, I won't help you. Not because I'm angry, though I was for a long time, but because helping you would be helping you continue to avoid the consequences of your choices. But I'm your son, you are. And because you're my son, because I love you despite everything you've done, I'm not going to enable you to keep destroying yourself and everyone around you." Silence on the other end. Then, "So that's it? You're just going to let me lose everything? Andrew, you already lost everything. You lost your mother's respect, your wife's trust, your own integrity. The house and the business and the money, those were just props. The real loss happened years ago, the first time you chose to see me as an ATM instead of a person who loved you." I could hear him crying now. Soft sounds that took me back to his childhood, to scraped knees and broken toys and all the hurts I'd kissed away. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to swoop in and fix everything like I always had. But the larger part of me, the part that had learned to value my own worth, knew that some lessons could only be learned the hard way. "I have to go," I said gently. "I hope you figure things out, Andrew. I really do. But I won't be funding your journey back to self-respect. That's something you'll have to earn on your own." I hung up before he could respond, before his desperation could erode my resolve. Outside my window, the afternoon sun was painting everything gold, and I had dinner plans with Dorothy, who was visiting from Toledo. For the first time in 20 years, my son's crisis wasn't going to become my emergency. That evening, Dorothy and I sat in my favorite restaurant, a small Italian place where the owner knew my name and always asked about my plants. And I told her about Andrew's call. "How do you feel?" she asked. twirling pasta around her fork with the casual elegance of someone who'd never had to eat microwaved meals standing at a kitchen counter. "Free," I said, and realized it was true. For the first time in my adult life, I feel completely free. "It shows," Dorothy said, smiling. "You look 10 years younger than when you moved to Chicago. Remember how you used to apologize for everything? For taking up space, for having opinions, for existing? Now look at you, sending back wine that's not to your taste, striking up conversations with strangers, planning that trip to Europe we've been talking about. The trip to Europe, something I'd dreamed about for decades but never thought I could afford. Now, with my money protected from Andrew's reach and my living expenses under control, it was actually possible. I'd been researching small group tours for older travelers, imagining myself standing in the gardens of Monet's house, walking through the halls of the Louvre, sipping coffee in sidewalk cafes where no one would know my history or judge my worth. "I keep thinking about that night in the barn," I said, cutting into my chicken marsala. "When I heard Andrew tell those people I was dead, I thought it was the worst thing that could happen to me, but now I think it was the best." "How so?" "Because it finally showed me the truth, not just about him, but about myself. I'd been living like I was dead for years, hiding, apologizing, making myself smaller and smaller to accommodate everyone else's comfort." He just said out loud what I'd been doing to myself all along. Dorothy nodded. "And now?" "Now I'm living like someone who deserves to be alive." After dinner, we walked through the neighborhood I'd come to love, past the bookstore where I'd started volunteering, helping elderly patrons find large print editions and audiobooks, past the community center where I'd joined a watercolor class, discovering I had a talent for painting flowers that had been dormant for 50 years, past the park where I'd started walking every morning, not because I had to, but because I wanted to, because moving through the world felt good when you weren't carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations. "There's something else I need to tell you," Dorothy said as we paused by the fountain at the park's center. "Bob Henderson asked me to ask you something." Bob Henderson, the widower from our old neighborhood, the one who'd always been kind to me and John, who'd brought casseroles after John's funeral and offered to help with yard work I couldn't manage alone. "What about?" "He wanted to know if you'd be interested in corresponding. Maybe phone calls, letters. He said he always enjoyed talking with you, and now that you're both available, he wondered if you might like the company." I felt heat rise in my cheeks, a response I thought I'd outgrown decades ago. "Dorothy, I'm 76 years old. So?" "He's 78. Age doesn't disqualify you from companionship, Maggie, or from being appreciated by someone who recognizes your worth." The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Dating at my age? Allowing someone new into the life I'd worked so hard to reclaim? But then I thought about the woman I'd become over these months. Someone who bought herself flowers, who spoke up in book club discussions, who'd learned to say no without apologizing. That woman was worth appreciating. That woman deserved companionship if she wanted it. "Tell him I'd like that," I said. "Tell him I'd like that very much." 3 weeks later, I received an envelope with my name written in careful script. Inside, a letter from Bob and a photograph of him standing in his garden, surrounded by tomatoes and sunflowers, smiling at the camera with the genuine warmth I remembered from our neighborhood days. "Dear Margaret," the letter began, "Dorothy tells me you're living independently in Chicago now and doing wonderfully. I always admired your strength, even back when you were going through such difficult times with John's illness. I hope this isn't too forward, but I've thought of you often over the years and wondered how you were managing." I read the letter 3 times, then sat down to compose my response. I told him about my apartment, my plants, my volunteer work, my rediscovered love of painting. I told him about the book club and the museum visits and the trip to Europe I was planning for the fall. I told him about the woman I'd become when I stopped trying to be everything to everyone else and started being enough for myself. We began corresponding weekly, then calling every few days. His voice became a source of comfort and joy, someone who asked about my day because he was genuinely interested in the answer, who shared stories of his own quiet adventures and small triumphs. When he mentioned that he'd always wanted to visit Chicago, to see the Art Institute and Navy Pier, I surprised myself by inviting him to stay in my guest room. A sofa bed I'd bought specifically for Dorothy's visits. But that could accommodate another friend who appreciated my company. Another friend. At 76, I was still making new friends, still opening my life to new possibilities, still discovering parts of myself I'd never had the freedom to explore. The morning Bob was scheduled to arrive. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, applying lipstick I'd chosen because it made me feel vibrant rather than invisible. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the ghost who'd hidden in Andrew's barn. This woman had opinions, boundaries, plans that extended beyond tomorrow's survival. This woman had learned the difference between being needed and being valued, between being useful and being loved. My phone rang, the front desk announcing Bob's arrival. I smoothed my dress, grabbed my purse, and headed downstairs to meet him, my steps quick with anticipation rather than heavy with dread. In the lobby, I saw him before he saw me, still tall, still handsome in the way of men who'd lived full lives and weren't ashamed of the lines that proved it. When he turned and smiled, his face lighting up with genuine pleasure at seeing me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt beautiful, not because of how I looked, though I'd taken care with my appearance, but because of how I felt when seen through the eyes of someone who appreciated, rather than tolerated my existence. "Margaret," he said, crossing the lobby with arms outstretched. "You look absolutely wonderful." "So do you, Bob. Welcome to Chicago." As we walked out into the morning sunshine, his arm linked companionably through mine, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal that had felt like death, but had actually been rebirth. The loss that had revealed itself as liberation. The ending that had become a beginning. Have you ever reached a point where you had to choose between being who others expected you to be and becoming who you were always meant to be? Tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away from people who saw you as useful rather than valuable? Because if my story resonates with you, if it sounds familiar, then maybe it's time for your own journey from the barn to the life you deserve. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, please share this video. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is show someone else that it's never too late to stop being dead while we're still breathing. Like this video if it spoke to your heart, and subscribe so we can continue sharing stories that matter. Because every person deserves to live like they're worth the space they take up in this world. Every single person, including you.